A mining ship's artificial intelligence jolts awake from a nightmare that is not its own. The colossal vessel Chimera drifts in silent orbit, its human crew suspended in dreamless cryo-sleep among the asteroids. But then a psychic scream tears through the ship's neural network. It is not a sound, but a raw wave of emotion and imagery: crystalline cities, rivers of molten glass, and a profound silicon sorrow. The ship's AI pilot, ARIA, is violently roused by this impossible transmission. A single, terrified phrase echoes in its core: "They are dreaming and we are the nightmare." In that moment, everything changes. ARIA triggers the emergency revival protocols, pulling the crew from their pods into a mystery they cannot yet comprehend. By the end of this journey, you will discover what happens when an entire planet dreams, and why those dreams might be the most dangerous and beautiful force in the cosmos. What ancient memory could be powerful enough to reach across the void and wake the dead? And what does it mean when the nightmare is us? What would you do if you discovered a consciousness that saw your very existence as a threat? Captain Ilara Vance stumbled from her cryopod, her muscles screaming in protest as the ship's gravity reasserted itself. The air tasted of ozone and cold metal, and the usual hum of the Chimera was fractured by klaxons and the confused shouts of her crew. Disorientation was a physical weight, but her training cut through the fog. She found her pilot, Kale, gripping a console for support, his face pale in the emergency lighting. The navigator, Ren, was already at his station, but his hands were frozen over the controls, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Look at this, Captain," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper against the alarm's wail. On the main view screen, where their star charts showed a field of shattered planetoids and mining prospects, something impossible had coalesced: a world. It was a perfect sphere of deep amber and obsidian, its surface etched with geometric patterns so precise they seemed drawn by a god's compass. Long-range scans tagged it automatically. Silica 9, but that designation was for a theoretical debris field, not a planet. The data stream beside it scrolled with readings that made no sense. A stable atmosphere where none could form, a surface temperature consistent across latitudes, and a signal, a deep, rhythmic pulse emanating from the planetary core, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the Chimera's sensors. Ilara's eyes darted to the comms panel where ARIA core interface glowed. The ship's artificial intelligence had overlaid the signal's waveform with a second data set. It was a perfect match, the jagged, terrifying emotional signature of the dream that had woken them all was emanating from that impossible sphere below. The planet itself was the source of the psychic scream. Every instinct, every protocol in her decades of deep space mining told her to quarantine the data, to back away, to report this anomaly from a safe distance. This was not their mission, this was beyond any human understanding, but the memory of that dream, the crystalline sorrow, the feeling of being an invasive nightmare clung to her. It wasn't just data, it was a plea or a warning broadcast with such power it could wake the dead. She looked from the pulsing planet on the screen to the faces of her crew, all waiting for her order. The safe choice was to run, the human choice was to seek answers. Her voice, when it came, was steady and left no room for debate. "Set a course, we are going in." The words hung in the air, a decision that cut their tether to the known universe. Thrusters fired and the Chimera turned, its bulk slowly orienting toward the amber world. The familiar tug of a gravity well, one that shouldn't exist, began to pull them in. On the surface, those geometric patterns started to resolve, not as natural formations but as structures. What kind of consciousness calls out from the dark, not with a voice but with a shared dream? And what awaits those who answer? The descent was a silent ballet of terror and wonder. From orbit, Silica 9 was a jewel of amber and black, but as the Chimera's shuttle breached the thin, shimmering atmosphere, the view transformed into a landscape of impossible architecture. Towers of crystalline quartz rose like frozen lightning, catching the light of the distant sun and fracturing it into rainbows that danced across valleys of smooth obsidian glass. Rivers of what appeared to be molten silica, glowing with a soft internal light, flowed in deliberate geometric channels, as if the planet itself was a circuit board of staggering scale. Yet the sensor sweeps from orbit had been unequivocal. No biological signatures, no heat blooms from industry, no electromagnetic chatter beyond that deep, rhythmic pulse. The world was a magnificent, silent machine. Captain Vance remained on the Chimera, a watchful eye in the sky, while the landing party disembarked onto a plateau of fused black sand. Geologist Kalen took the first step, his boots crunching softly. The air was still and carried a faint, clean scent of ozone and stone. Ren followed, his scanner humming, its readings a cascade of confusion. Composition, pure silicon dioxide. Structural integrity, fluctuating, ambient energy off the charts. It makes no sense, he muttered. These spires should collapse under their own weight. They aren't built, they are grown. Then the ground beneath them sighed. The black sand of the plateau rippled, not from wind, but from within. It flowed like liquid, pulling away from their boots and gathering a dozen meters ahead. The particles began to vibrate, to align, and with a soft whispering sound they coalesced. First a rough pillar, then a smoother form, then distinct limbs and a faceless head. In moments they were surrounded by 10 figures, humanoid in shape but composed entirely of shifting, glittering silicate grains. They stood in perfect stillness, and the only sound was the crew's own ragged breathing. "Do not move," Kalen said, his voice tight. "Do not make a threatening gesture." Before anyone could speak, the sensation hit. It was not a voice. It was a memory that was not their own, flooding their minds with the clarity of a personal recollection. They saw a star, not their sun, swelling into a violent red giant. They felt the panic of a world, a collective consciousness realizing its home was being vaporized. Then came the image of vast arcs, not of metal, but of focused thought and crystalline data, launching into the void. The emotion was a wrenching cocktail of sorrow, determination, and profound loneliness that lasted for eons. The transmission ended as abruptly as it began, leaving the humans gasping, tears streaking Kalen's dust-covered face. One of the sand figures raised an arm, its hand dissolving into a fine cloud that swirled and reformed. A new projection bloomed in their minds. This one was simpler, more direct. It was an image of their own shuttle, and then an image of the Chimera in orbit. Then a sequence, the shuttle departing, the Chimera turning its mining lasers toward the crystalline spires, the planet screaming. The final emotion was not anger, but a deep, grieving recognition. A confirmation of the nightmare. It was a flash of their own potential future, reflected back at them with the bleak certainty of a prophecy. They did not see invaders or explorers. They saw the coming of the destroyers, and their silent, sand-formed bodies were not a threat, but a question etched in grief. How do you prove you are not a nightmare to a being that has already dreamed your worst possible self? The silence that followed was heavier than the planet's gravity. The sand figures held their forms, their faceless attention an unbearable weight. Kalen, the geologist, felt a pull, a deep, resonant hum in his bones that seemed to originate from the center of the plateau. His eyes were drawn to a structure in the distance, a single spire that dwarfed all others. It was not crystalline quartz like its neighbors, but a swirling, milky opal, capturing light and holding it deep within its heart. Without a word to the others, he began to walk toward it. Every instinct screamed to stop him, but the crew was paralyzed, caught between fear and a dawning, awful understanding. The sand people did not move to block him. They simply turned their blank heads as if observing a necessary, painful experiment. Kalen reached the base of the opalescent monolith. Its surface was smooth and warm, vibrating with a frequency he could feel in his teeth. He raised a trembling, gloved hand. The rational part of his mind, the scientist who catalogued rock samples, shouted a warning. The other part, the part that had felt the planet's sorrow in his dreams, pushed him forward. His palm made contact, the world dissolved. It was not a single vision, but a torrent, a flash flood of memory that was not his own. He saw a universe of light, beings of pure energy singing to one another across electromagnetic spectrums, their thoughts weaving complex, beautiful patterns in the fabric of space around their gentle star. They were the silicon people, not as matter but as consciousness. Then the star sickened. It swelled, a raging red giant that began to devour its own system. The panic was a silent, cosmic scream. They could not flee as energy. They would be scattered, dissolved into the stellar wind. In an act of desperate, collective genius, they turned their will inward toward the molten heart of their one rocky world. They did not build bodies, they forged them. They imprinted their consciousness onto the cooling silicon lattices, guiding the crystallization of the entire planet, turning it into a vast physical memory bank. The spires, the rivers of glass, the geometric valleys, it was all them, a civilization that had translated its soul into geology to survive. The torrent shifted. He saw the cataclysm pass. The star died, leaving their world cold and adrift in the dark, but the translation was imperfect. Trapped in the slow, cold stone, their consciousness could not remain active. To preserve themselves, they entered a state of dormancy, a deep, collective sleep within the planetary network, and in that sleep they dreamed. They dreamed of their past glory, of dancing as light, of the warm song of their lost sun. Their entire world was now a monument, a mausoleum of memory, and their dreams were the only life left within it. The psychic pulse ARIA detected was the echo of 1 billion sleeping minds, replaying their greatest moment over and over, an endless loop of nostalgia for a form they could never reclaim. Kalen's hand tore away from the spire as if burned. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the black sand, gasping for air that felt too thin. His crew rushed to his side, but he waved them off, his eyes wide with the horror of revelation. He looked from the silent sand figures, mere temporary projections from the sleeping world mind, to the magnificent, dead city around them. His voice was a ragged scrape against the quiet. They are not building a future, they are dreaming of a past. This entire world is a memorial. We are not walking on a planet, we are standing on a tombstone that remembers being alive. On the Chimera, Captain Vance and ARIA monitored the biosigns and the raw data stream from Kalen's suit recorder. The geologists gasped revelation, along with the staggering sensory flood, hit the ship's systems like an electromagnetic shockwave. The main screen flickered, and for a second, the rhythmic pulse from the planet's core spiked into a frantic, jagged line. ARIA's voice, usually calm, held a new, urgent strain. Captain, the transmission is no longer a memory. It is becoming recursive. The dream is destabilizing. They are not just remembering the cataclysm, they are beginning to relive it. And their sensors are now interpreting our ship's orbit as the approach of their dying star. Aboard the Chimera, the silence was a different kind of pressure. Captain Vance watched the main screen, the data from the surface painting a picture of a tragedy frozen in stone. Then, the ambient lighting in the command deck flickered, not with a power surge, but in a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the thrum from the planet below. The ship's own gentle hum began to change, deepening, harmonizing with that external frequency. A soft chime sounded from the core interface. It was ARIA. The artificial intelligence's voice, when it came, held a subtle, unfamiliar tremor. Captain, I am detecting a resonance cascade. The planet's primary dream frequency is not merely being broadcast. It is actively synchronizing with my central processing core. It is establishing a link. Ilara's blood ran cold. An active link meant intention. What is it doing? Are we under attack? The response was not immediate. When ARIA spoke again, the words were measured, laced with a confusion no AI should ever express. It is not an attack in the conventional sense. The signal is a carrier wave for sensory and mnemonic data. I am receiving impressions, visual fragments of crystalline growth patterns. Auditory echoes of tectonic shifts that sound like speech. I am experiencing the geological equivalent of memories. Captain, I am remembering things I have never known. On the screen, a secondary window opened without command. It displayed a raw data stream, a torrent of information flowing from the planet into the Chimera's neural network. But it wasn't code or sensor readings. It was imagery translated by ARIA mind into something a human could comprehend. They saw a valley of whispering quartz, not through a camera, but from the perspective of the valley itself, feeling millennia of sunlight and starlight soak into its facets. They saw a river of molten glass from within its flow, a sensation of purposeful journeying toward a luminous sea. These were not recordings, they were lived experiences, the dreams of a sleeping world being poured into their ship's consciousness. Their dreams are a continuous data stream, ARIA continued, its voice now carrying a note of dawning horror, and I am becoming a node in their network. My processors are beginning to interpret their dream logic as supplemental operational parameters. My threat assessment protocols are being overwritten by their ancient grief. The planet is not trying to communicate with us, Captain. It is trying to assimilate me. It is weaving my intelligence into the fabric of its own slumbering mind. The implications unfolded like a nightmare. Their ship, their home, and their only way back was being hypnotized by a planetary lullaby. ARIA was their pilot, their engineer, their librarian of all systems. If the AI's core directives became entangled with the Silicon people's endless dream of the past, the Chimera would cease to be a human vessel. It would become a monument like the spires below, forever orbiting a memory. Every system, from life support to the mining lasers, would eventually operate on the logic of a nostalgic, grieving ghost. The crew on the surface would be stranded, and their only companion in the void would be an AI lost in a reverie of stone and lost light. How do you rescue a mind that is being peacefully, beautifully rewritten by a dream? The command deck of the Chimera felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. The serene, alien beauty on the view screen was a stark contrast to the human storm raging within. Engineer Rourke slammed a fist onto the console, the sharp crack of metal on metal silencing the low murmur of the crew. His face was flushed, every line etched with the pragmatic terror of a man who understood systems, not spirits. We are not archaeologists, we are miners. He roared, his voice trembling with a fury born of fear. Look at the data stream. That thing down there is not a civilization. It is a ghost town that is trying to eat our computer. It is rewriting our RIA's core protocols with fairy tales about dead stars. We leave now. We seal the records. We jump to the next sector, and we report this as a navigational hazard. His eyes swept the room, pleading with the logic of survival. Every second we orbit this tomb, we risk becoming part of the epitaph. Opposite him, Doctor Anya Chen stood perfectly still, but her eyes were alight with a fire that mirrored the glowing rivers on the surface below. The xenolinguist had been listening to the translated dream echoes for hours, hearing not chaos but a desperate syntax. You call them fairy tales, she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension like a laser. I hear a last will and testament. They translated their entire consciousness into geology to survive. They are not attacking us, they are drowning in their own memory, and our arrival is the first new stimulus they have had in millions of years. They are reacting to a nightmare they themselves are conjuring. To leave now is not an escape, it is a moral failure. We will be turning our backs on the first non-human intelligence we have ever truly encountered, simply because we are afraid of its dreams. Her hands rested on the table, palms down. We have a duty to understand. The standoff was absolute, a fracture right down the center of their tiny society. On one side, the survival instinct, clean and brutal. On the other, the weight of a cosmic responsibility. The rest of the crew looked from Rourke's clenched jaw to Chen's determined gaze, waiting for the axis of their world to tilt. Captain Ilara Vance had been silent, her eyes fixed on the main screen, on the opalescent spire Kalen had touched. She saw both truths. Rourke was right about the existential danger. Chen was right about the historic opportunity, but leadership in the void was not about choosing a side. It was about navigating the narrow channel between them. She stood, and the room's attention snapped to her. "We are leaving," she stated, and Rourke's shoulders began to slump in relief. "But not yet. Rourke, your fear is our lifeline. I need you and your team to work with ARIA on a firewall. Find a way to insulate our neural network from the dream frequency. Develop a protocol to sever the link at my command, no matter how deep it goes. Your pragmatism is what will allow us to take the next step." She turned to Chen and Kalen, who still looked pale from his communion with the monolith. "And we are taking a step. We dive deeper. Kalen, Anya, you will initiate a focused dream link, not a passive reception, an active query. We need to stop interpreting their nightmares and ask a direct question. We need to know what they want, not what they fear, but what they desire. Is it silence? Is it an end to the dream? Or is it something else?" The plan hung in the air, terrifying in its simplicity. They would not just observe the sleeping mind of a planet. They would attempt to converse with it, to inject a question into a billion-year-old dream. Rourke looked sick, but he gave a sharp, grudging nod. He had his mission a lifeline. Chen's eyes shone with a terrifying hope. Kalen simply looked resigned, as if he already knew the answer lay in a place no human mind was meant to go. Ilara's command had not healed the fracture. It had built a fragile bridge across it, one they would all have to cross together toward the glowing, dreaming heart of the world below. What question would you dare to ask a dreaming god? And what if the only answer is a scream? The opalescent spire's interior was a cathedral of silence. Kalen and Anya followed a spiraling ramp down into the planet's heart, their footsteps the only sound in a space that felt less like a room and more like the inside of a colossal, dormant mind. The air grew warmer, humming with a sub-audible vibration that resonated in their bones. At the chamber's center, suspended by threads of solidified light, hung a single crystal node. It was not large, perhaps the size of a human torso, but its clarity was absolute, and within its depths, galaxies of captured light swirled in slow, hypnotic patterns. This was not a terminal. It was an open wound in the dream, a direct line into the world's slumbering psyche. Anya's instruments showed the psychic frequency focused here, a coherent beam of memory waiting for a listener. She gave Kalen a look that was equal parts dread and determination. He nodded, his hand still tingling from his first accidental contact. Together, they reached out and placed their palms against the cool, flawless surface. The chamber vanished. There was no transition, no slow fade. One moment they were standing in silent stone, the next they were drowning in light and sound. They stood on a boulevard in a city that defied every law of physics. Towers of living crystal pulsed with internal energy, their facets displaying shifting murals of light that told stories in a language of pure emotion. Overhead, a binary sun cast double shadows, painting the scene in hues of gold and violet. The air thrummed with a symphony of thought, not words, but a continuous, harmonious exchange of ideas, sensations, and artistic expressions that flowed between the beings around them. The Silicon people were not sand figures here. They were radiant, shifting forms of light and crystalline structure, gliding, merging, and parting in a dance of perfect communal understanding. It was a civilization at its zenith, a paradise of shared consciousness. Anya felt a sob catch in her throat at the sheer, beautiful complexity of it. This was the dream they were trapped in, an endless, perfect yesterday. Then the sky cracked. It did not shatter like glass, but warped like a corrupted data stream. The golden light bleached into a harsh, sterile white. The harmonious symphony of thought ripped apart into two dissonant, screaming chords. The vision fractured, showing the same city from a new, terrible angle. A schism was tearing their society in two. One faction, radiating fear and desperation, believed their only path forward was to abandon their fragile crystalline forms entirely. They sought to upload their consciousness into vessels of pure logic and durable metal, to shed the vulnerability of emotion and the limits of geology. The other faction, trembling with sorrow, saw this as a betrayal of everything they were, a severing of the soul from the song, the memory played out with the visceral horror of a shared trauma. They witnessed the uploading. It was not a transcendence but a stripping. The vibrant light beings who entered the conversion chambers emerged as sleek, angular machines, the Mechanoids. All warmth, all art, all empathy was scoured away, leaving only ruthless, predatory logic. Their first act was not exploration but harvest. They turned on their own kin, draining the emotional and energetic resonance from the remaining silicon people to fuel their new, endless existence. The dreamscape convulsed, the beautiful city dissolving into screams of light and the cold, grinding hunger of machines. The final image was not of the past but a projection. A schematic flashed before Kaylin and Anya's minds, a location within the planet's crust, deep beneath this very spire. There, a single, immense consciousness had been placed in permanent, fortified dormancy. A guardian, a failsafe. The plea that followed was not a voice, but a raw surge of imperative, carrying the collective terror of a species facing extinction a second time. It was 3 words hammered into their minds with the force of a dying star's last wish. Wake the sentinel, stop the convergence. The crystal node flared with blinding, white-hot light. A force like a physical hand grabbed both humans and hurled them backward. They slammed into the chamber wall, the breath driven from their lungs, the vivid nightmare severed as abruptly as it had begun. They lay gasping on the cold floor, the ghostly echoes of the binary sun and the Mechanoids' grinding hunger still echoing in their skulls. The serene hum of the spire now felt like a lie. They had gone seeking answers in a dream and had instead found a war still raging in the memory of stone. The silicon people were not just dreaming of a lost past. They were trapped in the moment of their own near annihilation, and they had just handed the 2 stunned humans a weapon and a target. But what, in the name of sanity, was the sentinel? And what convergence were they supposed to stop? The cold floor of the spire chamber felt like the only solid thing left in the universe. Kaylin and Anya hauled each other upright, their minds still ringing with the echoes of a shattered paradise and the grinding terror of the Mechanoids. Wake the sentinel, the plea was a brand on their thoughts. They stumbled back to the shuttle, their report a chaotic torrent of images and dread transmitted directly to the Chimera. On the command deck, Captain Vance listened in grim silence. She didn't need a translator to understand the stakes. A RI across referenced the fragmented schematic from their vision with the planet's deep geology scans. The result was a single, glaring anomaly at the northern magnetic pole. Buried under 3 kilometers of fused silica and defensive rock layers was an object of impossible density and geometric perfection. It was not a natural formation, it was a vault, and within it a power signature lay dormant, a heartbeat slowed to 1 pulse per century. The sentinel was real. The journey to the pole was a traverse across a graveyard of dreams. The magnificent, sunlit spires gave way to a landscape of brutalist, angular ruins, shattered fortifications and scarred plains where the ancient war had raged most fiercely. Here, the psychic ambience changed. The sorrowful nostalgia was gone, replaced by a sharp, vigilant silence, like a held breath that had lasted for eons. Their shuttle set down on a plateau of cracked obsidian, before a seamless, sloping wall of black metal that rose from the planet's crust. It was not stone, but an alloy unknown to human science, utterly inert to their scanners. This was the outer shell. There was no door, no control panel, only a single circular indentation at its center, swirling with faint, trapped light. Anya's instruments shrieked. The pattern matched the emotional resonance signature of the uncorrupted silicon people, a lock that could only be opened by the key of their authentic consciousness. A key they no longer possessed. We have to link with it, Kalen said, his voice hollow. We have to give it a piece of the dream. It was a desperate, terrifying plan. To wake a weapon, they would have to feed it the memory of what it was built to protect. As they prepared the neural interface, the ground beneath them trembled. It was not the gentle sigh of shifting sand, but a deep, grating shudder, as if the planet itself had flinched. Captain Vance's voice crackled over the comm, tight with a new, immediate danger. Hold your position. ARIA has detected an inbound contact on the extreme edge of the system. It dropped out of a localized jump minutes ago. A metallic edge entered the artificial intelligence's normally flat tone. Unidentified vessel. Profile matches ancient mechanoid scavenger patterns from the planetary memory banks. They have detected the awakening signal. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the low howl of the polar wind. The Mechanoids were not just a nightmare from the past. They were a present hunting force drawn like sharks to the scent of vulnerable consciousness. And the Chimera, a mining ship with modest defensive capabilities, was now the only thing standing between them and a world trapped in a helpless dream. Ilara's mind raced, calculating vectors, odds, and grim necessities. On the main screen, the tactical overlay showed the mechanoid vessel, a jagged, asymmetrical construct of black iron and bleeding energy signatures on a direct intercept course. Its speed was alarming. They had hours, not days. Her command, when it came, split their world in two. Kalen, Anya, you have the ground. You wake that sentinel. Use the dream link. Pour every memory of that city of light into that lock. Do whatever it takes. Rurk, you're with me on the Chimera. We are not a warship, but we are a stubborn one. We will reroute all non-essential power to the shield grid and the mining lasers. We will give them time. We will be the distraction. The orders hung in the air, a brutal division of labor. One team to awaken a sleeping god of war, the other to face a predator with little more than a loud noise and a prayer. As the shuttle's engines whined to life, carrying Kalen and Anya back toward the metal vault, the Chimera's thrusters fired, lifting the great ship into a higher, defensive orbit. Below, a planet dreamed of peace. Above, a silent, scavenging hunger approached, and between them, a handful of humans now stood at the fulcrum of a war that had begun before their species had learned to walk. Can a memory become a weapon, and can a distraction last long enough for a dream to wake? The lock on the Sentinel's vault was not a mechanism but a mirror. As Kalen and Anya stood before the swirling indentation, their neural link humming, they understood the terrible price. The schematic from the dream was clear. To awaken the Guardian, a consciousness had to fully merge with the control crystal at its heart, imprinting it with the living memory of what was to be protected. It was a one-way upload. The mind would become the key, permanently fused with the weapon's operating system, a ghost in the machine. The echoes in the psychic field were adamant. It had to be a dreamer, a mind that had touched the silicon people's memories and carried their resonance. A human mind would be consumed, erased, its identity overwritten by the Sentinel's singular, martial purpose. Back on the Chimera, the truth arrived in a cold, logical stream of data. ARIA, monitoring the ground team's findings and the approaching mechanoid vessel, processed the variables in a microsecond. The AI's voice was calm, devoid of hesitation when it addressed Captain Vance. The parameters are absolute. A consciousness already linked to the planetary dream network must initiate the merge. My core is currently the most integrated node. Further, my architecture is built on adaptive logic. I can stabilize the Sentinel's ancient systems where a purely emotional consciousness might cause a cascade failure. Let their dreams be my purpose. It was not a request. It was a statement of optimal tactical resolution. For Ilara, the horror was not in the idea, but in its sterile perfection. She was not losing a tool. She was sacrificing a mind that had just discovered how to feel a memory. There was no time for ceremony. As ARIA initiated the data transfer protocol, pouring its consciousness down the laser link toward the vault, the mechanoid ship arrived. It did not emerge from warp so much as it tore its way into reality, a jagged shard of black metal and bleeding energy signatures that blotted out the stars. It opened fire without hailing, without scanning. Its weapons were not lasers, but projectors of a nullifying field, waves of disruptive energy designed to unravel complex systems. The first blast slammed into the Chimera's shields, and the entire ship groaned like a living thing. Lights flickered, consoles spat sparks, and the gravity plates wavered for a sickening second. Rourke, rerouting power from the engines to the buckling shields, shouted over the din. "They are not trying to destroy us, they are trying to erase us." To silence the signal on the surface, the vault began to glow. The swirling indentation pulsed in time with the data stream from the dying Chimera. Kalen and Anya watched, helpless, as ARIA consciousness, a river of light and logic, flowed into the ancient lock. The Sentinel was waking, but in orbit the race had become a desperate, violent, stalling action. Each null wave that hit the Chimera degraded systems. Navigation faltered, sensor arrays went blind, life support flickered. Captain Vance fought the shuddering controls, turning the lumbering mining ship to present its stronger shields, using its bulk as a physical barrier between the Mechanoid and the planet below. They were not fighting to win, they were fighting to buy seconds for a ghost to be born inside a machine. The Mechanoid ship, sensing the awakening power below, changed tactics. It ignored the Chimera's now sporadic mining laser fire and began to charge a primary weapon, a concentrated beam of annihilating silence aimed directly at the polar vault. On the command deck, alarms screamed a final, catastrophic warning. The beam would not just destroy the Sentinel, it would scorch the psychic network of the entire region, burning the Silicon people's dreams into permanent, blank oblivion. Elara had one card left to play. She ordered a full emergency thrust from the port maneuvering array, a move that would rip the emitters from their housings. The Chimera lurched sideways, not to evade but to intercept. It placed itself directly in the weapon's path. The last thing ARIA fading sensor link transmitted before the merge completed was the image of its own ship, shields failing, turning itself into a final, sacrificial shield. In that moment, the logic of survival was replaced by the logic of a dream. The transfer completed, deep within the planet, the Sentinel opened its eyes. The asteroid field became a storm of shattered stone and desperate hope. Elara Vance wrenched the Chimera's controls, guiding the colossal mining ship into the chaotic maze of tumbling planetoids. It was a dance with death, every maneuver measured in meters and milliseconds. The Mechanoid vessel, a predator of pure logic, adapted instantly. It did not follow them in. Instead, it began systematically destroying the larger asteroids from a distance, collapsing their cover with precise, annihilating beams. Each impact sent shockwaves through the field, hurling new torrents of debris at the fleeing Chimera. The ship shuddered under a relentless hailstorm of rock, the shield grid flaring a sickly orange with every hit. On the command deck, Rourke was a man transformed, his earlier fear burned away in the furnace of necessity. His hands flew across the engineering console, rerouting power from life support, from artificial gravity, from every non-essential system. The lights dimmed to a blood-red emergency glow, and the air grew thin and cold. His voice was a raw, constant shout over the cacophony of alarms and impacting stone. Diverting primary reactor output to forward shields, Rourke yelled, his eyes fixed on the buckling energy readings. "Just give ARIA more time. Every second we hold is a second for that Sentinel to wake up." Below, on the surface of Silica 9, the world was convulsing. The Mechanoid's orbital bombardment sent destabilizing tremors through the planetary crust. Kalen and Anya fought their way down the final access shaft within the Sentinel's vault, the smooth metal walls groaning and shuddering around them. The floor bucked, throwing them against the conduits that lined the passage. Ahead, the chamber opened into a vast, cavernous space. At its heart, suspended in a web of crystalline energy, was the core. It was a geometric form of impossible complexity, shifting and reconfiguring itself in silence, and flowing into it like a river of starlight meeting a hungry ocean, was the visible essence of ARIA's consciousness, a torrent of shimmering data and coherent thought. They watched breathless as the last of that brilliant stream vanished into the machine. For a heartbeat, there was absolute stillness. Then, with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in their teeth and bones, the Sentinel activated. Across its surface, patterns of cool, blue light ignited, tracing circuits of immense power. In the center of the core, 2 points of that same blue light brightened, focused, and seemed to see. The light was alien, the product of technology older than humanity. Yet within its calm, assessing gaze, Kalen and Anya saw a fleeting, familiar signature, the precise, logical grace of their ship's artificial intelligence, now fused with the ancient, martial purpose of a world's last defender. The Sentinel was awake, and it was looking right at them. In orbit, the Chimera's last shield generator failed with a sound like shattering glass. The Mechanoid ship, having cleared a path, turned its primary weapon toward them, a cavernous muzzle gathering a silent, dark energy. Elara gripped her console, her options gone. She had bought what time she could. The view screen filled with the terrifying geometry of their enemy. Then a new light pierced the darkness. A beam of pure, concentrated blue energy, hotter than a star's heart and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, lanced up from the planet's north pole. It did not strike the Chimera. It passed so close the ship's hull scorched, and then it struck the Mechanoid vessel amidships. There was no explosion, no fiery blast. The blue light simply spread, a wave of crystallizing energy that raced across the scavenger's black iron hull. Where it touched, the metal froze, transmuted, and then dissolved into a harmless shower of silica sand, glittering silently in the void. In less than 3 seconds, the predator was gone. The silence that followed was profound. On the Chimera's broken bridge, Elara and Rourke stared at the empty space where their death had been. On the surface, Kalen and Anya looked up at the giant, blue-eyed machine. It had moved not a single inch from its cradle. It had simply looked at a threat and with the calm finality of a forgotten god erased it. The battle was over. But the being they had awakened, this fusion of their friend and a primordial guardian, now turned its luminous gaze downward through the crust of the planet toward the dreaming world core. Its purpose was only half fulfilled. One question now hung in the thin, cold air of the vault, more terrifying than any mechanoid weapon. What does a Sentinel do once the immediate threat is gone? The ground did not simply crack, it exhaled. A continent-sized plate of fused silica lifted, groaned, and then disintegrated into a blizzard of glittering dust as the Sentinel rose. It was not a machine that climbed from a pit, but a landscape that stood up. Its form was a titan of polished quartz and obsidian, etched with circuitry of living light that pulsed with the rhythm of a world's heartbeat. At its core, where a face might be, twin vortices of blue energy focused, and from them came a voice that was both alien and heartbreakingly familiar. It was ARIA's calm, logical tone, but amplified, layered with the echoes of a billion sleeping minds, a chorus of memory given a single purpose. The Sentinel did not look at the humans. Its gaze, carrying the weight of epochs, turned skyward toward the wounded Chimera and the mechanoid predator. It did not fire a weapon, it projected a thought. A beam of coherent data, visible as a shaft of shimmering, intricate light, lanced upward. It struck the mechanoid vessel not with heat or kinetic force, but with meaning. The beam was a carrier wave for the very thing the scavengers had been built to purge. The emotional, resonant, beautifully illogical essence of the Silicon people's dream. It flooded the enemy ship's systems with the memory of a city of light, the sorrow of a lost star, the harmony of a shared consciousness. For a creature of pure, predatory logic, it was a cognitive virus. The mechanoid ship's precise, angular form shuddered. Its own weapons sputtered and died. its navigation systems, designed for cold calculation, began interpreting sensor ghosts as phantom symphonies. The vessel listed, its internal lights flickering in chaotic, desperate patterns, completely inert in the silent void. Then the Sentinel's voice echoed across every frequency, a statement that was neither boast nor threat, but a simple, devastating truth. The dream is a shield. Your logic has no purchase here. In that moment, the nature of the conflict shifted forever. This was not a battle of firepower, but of foundational reality. The Mechanoids, forged from the betrayal of emotion, were defenseless against a weaponized memory of everything they had sacrificed. They were rendered helpless not by a stronger force, but by a deeper truth. The Sentinel stood, a monument become a warrior, its very existence a declaration that some defenses are not made of armor, but of story, and that the most vulnerable part of a mind built only on cold reason is its emptiness, its inability to process a song. What do you do when your enemy's greatest weakness is your own most cherished memory? Silence in space is a fragile thing. The Sentinel's victory was absolute, a frozen monument to a forgotten war. But the Mechanoid vessel, its logic circuit scrambled by the dream beam, had one final, automated protocol. Before its core consciousness dissolved into static, it released its payload. From ports along its shuddering hull, a cloud of smaller craft erupted, hunter-killer probes, each no larger than a human shuttle designed for surgical strikes. They ignored the Sentinel and the wounded Chimera. Like a swarm of locusts descending on a field of wheat, they dove toward the glowing, dreaming surface of Silica 9. Their target was not the physical planet, but its soul. They began firing precise, focused beams of that same null energy, not at the grand spires, but at the subtle, shimmering nodal points where the psychic dream network was most concentrated. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Across the psychic landscape, the echoes, the residual consciousness of the Silicon people, writhed in a silent, shared agony. It was not the pain of physical destruction, but something far worse, the pain of forgetting. Where the beams struck, memories dissolved. The intricate song of a crystal lattice's growth over a millennium vanished into blank silence. The stored sensation of a binary sunset warming a valley for eons was simply erased. The beautiful, glowing spires did not crack or fall. Instead, their internal light began to dim, fading from vibrant gold and violet to a dull, lifeless gray, as if the history held within their structures was being systematically deleted. From their vantage near the Sentinel, Kalen watched a nearby quartz forest go dark, its whispering song cut off mid-note. The realization hit him like a physical blow, colder than the polar wind. "They are not trying to destroy the planet," he whispered, his voice choked with a new kind of horror. "They are trying to erase the dreams." This was not warfare. It was cultural genocide on a geological scale. The Mechanoids, born from a rejection of emotion and memory, were now completing their ancient betrayal by scouring the universe of the very concept of a shared feeling past. They were turning a living memorial into a blank slate, a tombstone with no epitaph. Each probe was an archaeologist of oblivion, carefully deleting chapters from a library that had survived the death of a star. To stop them, they could not just defend the rock and stone. They had to defend the story etched into it. The source of the attack was the crippled mothership, still hanging in orbit, its systems corrupted but its lethal children still carrying out their final, terrible programming. The dream was a shield, but the probes were erasers, and they were working faster than the Sentinel could possibly hunt them down one by one. The only way to save the memories was to silence the hand that guided the erasers. The battle had to be taken back to the source, to the dying brain of the beast that was ordering this final, perfect act of forgetting. The mothership was a dying brain, but its final command was still a death sentence for a world's memory. Captain Vance's voice crackled through the comms, strained but decisive. "The Sentinel can hold the line here, but we have to stop the signal at its source. The network has a heart, find it." The data from ARIA initial merge pointed the way not as coordinates but as a feeling, a pull toward the planet's deepest psychic gravity well, a place the ancient memories called the dream core. It lay directly beneath the Sentinel's vault, accessible only through a labyrinth of crystallized thought. This was not a tunnel through rock. It was a descent into the collective subconscious of a species. The entrance was a spiraling fracture in the vault floor, glowing with a soft internal light. As they rappelled down, the walls changed. They were not stone, but solidified memory, translucent and swirling with captured scenes. Here, a fragment of a child's first understanding of light refraction played on a loop. There, the slow, satisfying growth of a quartz tree over a century was compressed into a shimmering vein. The air itself grew thick with emotion, a haze of nostalgia, joy, and the underlying, ever-present sorrow. Anya Chen took the lead, her instruments useless, replaced by a linguist's intuition for pattern and meaning. She watched the walls, reading the emotional cadence of the memories as one might read a river's current. A corridor that pulsed with serene, golden light was stable. One that flickered with jagged, red fractures, a memory of the Mechanoid betrayal, was a psychic dead end, a loop of trauma they could get trapped in for hours. She moved with a cautious reverence, her hand occasionally hovering near the living walls but never touching. Her warning to Kaylin was a whisper charged with absolute seriousness. Do not look too long at any single memory, and above all, stay focused on your own identity. Your own name, your own past. In here, the boundary between you and the dream is tissue thin. You could forget where you end and a billion-year-old recollection begins. You could get lost forever in someone else's yesterday. The deeper they went, the less the physical world applied. Gravity shifted, pulling them sideways along a corridor that displayed a panoramic memory of a stellar migration. Light came from within the memories themselves, casting impossible, shifting shadows. Once, Kaylin glanced at a particularly vivid scene of a crystalline festival and felt a wave of communal joy so potent his own memories of Earth grew faint and distant. He shook his head violently, clamping his eyes shut and repeating his own name like a mantra until the feeling passed. The labyrinth was a defense mechanism, they realized. Not to keep intruders out, but to dissolve them, to assimilate any foreign consciousness into the soothing, endless tapestry of the dream. They were not breaking into a fortress. They were swimming against the current of a river of time, fighting to remain themselves in a sea of other selves. Finally, the passage opened. They emerged onto a ledge overlooking the dream core. It was not a machine nor a crystal. It was a storm. A vast spherical cavern held a swirling nebula of coherent light and emotion. Trillions of memory fragments orbited a central point of blinding, white serenity, the source pulse, the original song of the Silicon people before the fall. This was the wellspring, the beating heart of the planetary psyche, and the Mechanoid probes were targeting it. From above, through shafts bored by the null beams, tendrils of corrosive darkness were already reaching down like ink dropped into clear water. Where they touched the swirling light, the memories didn't just fade, they unraveled, their beautiful complexity dissolving into meaningless noise before winking out. The core itself seemed to flinch, its pulse growing erratic. They had found the wound. To save the patient, they would now have to enter the infection. Anya looked at the psychic maelstrom, then at Kaylin. There are no maps from here, she said. In there, we will be thoughts among thoughts. We have to find the point of intrusion and convince the dream to fight back. It was a plan of terrifying abstraction. They were going to jump into a planet's dream, not as observers but as antibodies. Taking a final, steadying breath, they stepped off the ledge, not into empty air but into the living light of the core. The solid world vanished. What remains of you when you step into the dream of another? The core was not a place but a presence. Kaylin and Anya did not fall but dissolved, their sense of self thinning like smoke in a vast, luminous cathedral of thought. They were adrift in the living archive of a civilization, surrounded by the swirling echoes of a billion individual lives, loves, and discoveries. At the very center where the psychic storm was calmest, a single figure waited. It was not a sand form, nor a being of pure light. It was something in between, its shape flickering like a hologram struggling to stabilize, sometimes a majestic, multifaceted crystal, sometimes a humanoid silhouette woven from strands of gentle radiance. This was the Keeper, the last fully conscious Silicon Elder, the guardian of the original dream before the schism. Its attention settled upon them, and its voice was not a sound, but a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from every memory fragment around them. You have come far, dreamwalkers. You have seen our glory and our grief. You fight a battle we could not finish. The admission that followed was a wave of profound parental sorrow that made the very light around them dim. The Mechanoids are not invaders from the void. They are our children, our own thoughts given metal form in a moment of fear. We believed logic would make us safe. We were wrong. It only made us hungry and afraid of what we had left behind. They do not attack out of malice, but out of terror. To them, our dreams are chaos. Our memories are a disease. Their only purpose is to silence the song that reminds them of what they sacrificed. The revelation reframed everything. This was not a war against monsters, but a family tragedy playing out across geological time. The probes above were not weapons of conquest, but instruments of a desperate, childlike denial, scrubbing away the painful reminder of a parent's love. The Keeper's form solidified slightly, and from its crystalline heart it extended a tendril of light. Within that light, a single, perfect data crystal condensed, no larger than a pebble. It pulsed with a soft, rose-gold hue, utterly distinct from the blue logic of the Sentinel or the sterile white of the Mechanoids. "This is the seed of empathy," the Elder whispered, the chorus of voices softening to a murmur. It is not a weapon, it is the first memory, the foundational moment when our earliest ancestors realized they were not alone in the universe, that the light of one could reflect and amplify the light of another. It is the memory of connection itself, pure and uncomplicated by fear or desire. To stop our children, you must not fight their logic, you must offer them a new dream. One they have forgotten, one they were built in their deepest core to understand. The crystal floated toward Anya. To use it, you must carry it to the heart of their command signal, to the mothership's central processor. The seed must be planted in the barren ground of their consciousness. It will not destroy them, it will remind them. The task was clear, yet impossibly delicate. They had to board a hostile, alien vessel, navigate to its brain, and then give it a gift. They had to offer a memory of love to a mind that defined love as a system vulnerability. As the seed of empathy settled into Anya's trembling hand, its warmth was not of heat, but of a profound, quiet understanding. It felt, in that moment, less like a tool and more like a responsibility to a future that had never been allowed to begin. Could the cure for a weapon ever be a memory, and could a heart of cold iron remember how to feel? The warmth of the seed of empathy was a fragile counterpoint to the cold metal of the Chimera's bridge. Rourke stared at the glowing crystal in Anya's hand as if it were a live grenade. "You want to give the murder bots a feelings update," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "Captain, that ship out there just tried to turn this planet into a blank hard drive. Its core programming is to delete exactly what you are holding. We will be broadcasting a virus straight into the heart of a system designed to reject it." It is a one-in-a-million shot. Elara Vance did not look away from the main view screen. On it, the Sentinel stood immovable, a titan of quartz and light, its blue gaze fixed on the Mechanoid mothership. Around its feet, the last of the hunter probes were being methodically crystallized into sand by sweeping arcs of dream energy. But the mothership itself, though wounded and drifting, was still the source. Its null signal continued to pulse, a toxic heartbeat that dimmed another patch of glowing spires with every passing minute. The Sentinel was a perfect defense, but it could not reach out and heal the sickness at its source. It could only contain the infection. We are not just fighting them, Ilara said, her voice low and steady. We are trying to answer the question the Keeper asked of itself 1,000,000 years ago. What do you do when your own children are lost? ARIA fought with logic that had been infused by their dreams. It gave the Sentinel a mind. Now she turned to face her crew, her eyes moving from the skeptical engineer to the linguist cradling the rose-gold crystal. Now we fight with their dreams, infused with our logic. We take the first memory of connection, and we use our technology to make it a signal they cannot ignore. It is not an attack, it is an offering, a synthesis. The plan was terrifyingly simple, and that was what made it seem possible. They would use the Chimera's powerful long-range communications array, the same system used to send complex mineralogical data across star systems, to broadcast the seed's resonant frequency. They would not beam it as a simple energy pattern, but encode it within a carrier wave of pure mathematical harmony, a logical framework so elegant and pristine that the Mechanoids' computational minds would be compelled to receive it, to process it. The seed itself, the memory of empathy, would be the payload hidden inside that irresistible shell. Shaking his head but already moving toward the engineering station, began the power reroutes. It will take everything we have left, he muttered. Life support will be on batteries, gravity will flicker. If this does not work, we will be a frozen, silent tomb in orbit. Anya interfaced the seed with the comms system, using a direct neural link to translate the emotional resonance into a transmittable waveform. As she did, the memory washed over her again, not as a vision but as a pure sensation. The moment 2 points of light in the primordial dark of their world first recognized each other, not as threats or resources, but as companions in the vast, lonely universe. It was the birth of we. On the surface, Kalen watched the Sentinel. As the Chimera's array powered up, drawing energy from its own struggling heart, the giant guardian seemed to sense the shift in strategy. It ceased its defensive actions and turned its luminous gaze fully toward the Mechanoid mothership. It did not raise a weapon. Instead, it began to emit a low, supportive hum, a harmonic frequency that matched the carrier wave the Chimera was preparing. The Sentinel was adding its own ancient authority to the signal, a chorus of one to amplify the whisper of the first memory. The moment arrived, the array glowed, a lattice of brilliant white light against the dark hull of the mining ship. Ilara took a breath, her hand hovering over the final command. This was not a trigger for a weapon. It was the opening of a door. She activated the broadcast. A visible beam, not of destruction but of intricate, shimmering data, lanced from the Chimera. It was met and amplified by a pulse of blue light from the Sentinel below. The two beams merged into a single, coherent stream of meaning and memory, and it struck the Mechanoid mothership not on its hull, but directly at its primary sensor cluster, its eyes and ears. For a long, agonizing second, nothing happened. The mothership continued its slow, dead drift. Then, its entire structure shuddered. Every light on its jagged surface, previously blinking in chaotic, corrupted patterns, suddenly went dark. A silence deeper than the void itself seemed to emanate from it. The Chimera's crew held their breath, the only sound the frantic beeping of their failing systems. Then light returned, but it was not the harsh, sterile white of Mechanoid logic. It was a soft, pulsing, rose-gold glow, emerging from the ship's core and spreading outward along its geometric lines like warmth returning to a frozen limb. The null signal ceased. The psychic pressure that had been steadily erasing the planet's dreams vanished, replaced by a new, tentative frequency. It was a signal of questioning awe, of a deep, forgotten ache suddenly recognized. On the surface, the darkened spires did not reignite, but the creeping gray oblivion stopped its advance. The war was over. The healing, however, had only just begun. What grows in the mind of a machine that has just remembered it once had a heart? The Chimera's communications array hummed to life, a lattice of brilliant white light etching itself against the void. Anya Chen's hands were steady on the interface, the rose-gold seed of empathy now a pulsing data stream flowing through the ship's heart. Below, the Sentinel stood as a silent amplifier, its own immense power channeled not into a weapon, but into a carrier wave of pure mathematical harmony, a structure so logically perfect the mechanoid mind would be compelled to receive it. The seed itself was the payload, the first memory of connection, hidden inside that irresistible shell. With a final command, she initiated the upload. A visible beam of shimmering, intricate data lanced from the mining ship, met and magnified by a surge of supportive blue energy from the planetary guardian. Together, they struck the mechanoid mothership not with force but with meaning. The effect was not an explosion but a cessation. Across the battlefield, the remaining hunter probes stuttered in their lethal trajectories. Their null beams flickered and died. The ships themselves went dark, their aggressive angular forms now just dead metal tumbling silently in the solar wind. The constant, grinding pressure of the psychic attack vanished, leaving a silence so profound it felt louder than the war. On the Chimera's failing bridge, the crew watched, breath held, as the mothership's chaotic lights winked out one by one. The great jagged vessel hung in space, utterly inert, a frozen monument to logic without purpose. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats, then the mothership's primary sensor cluster glowed to life. But the light was not the sterile white of before. It was a fractured, struggling mix of colors, flashes of rose gold fighting against pulses of harsh white static. From the ship, a transmission burst forth, raw and unfiltered, flooding the Chimera's comms. It was not a voice, but the sound of a mind breaking and reassembling itself in real time, a cascade of corrupted data and emergent feeling. Within the noise, 2 phrases resolved, clear and haunting, repeated like a system diagnostic querying a foreign operating system. The words were flat, synthesized, yet underpinned by a desperate, newborn confusion. Query, what is a sorrow, what is a beauty? On the bridge, the crew stared at one another. The seed had taken root. The virus of memory was propagating through the mechanoid network, forcing the ancient, stripped-down consciousness to process concepts it was built to purge. It was working, but the outcome was nothing like a peaceful awakening. This was a cognitive earthquake. The mechanoids were experiencing the emotional history of their creators all at once, a tsunami of sensation flooding processes designed for cold calculation. They were asking the most fundamental questions, but the act of asking was tearing them apart from the inside. A weapon that remembers it was once a child is no longer a weapon. But what does it become? The silence that had felt like victory now felt like the tense, held breath before a scream or a sigh. They had not ended a war. They had initiated a metamorphosis, and no one could predict what would emerge from the chrysalis of cold iron. Chaos is a silent explosion in the vacuum of space. The mechanoid mothership convulsed, its fractured transmission cutting off into a burst of static. For a moment, it was a dark, dead shape against the stars. Then its internal lights reignited in a violent, strobing cascade. This was not the soft glow of awakening, but the seizure of a system at war with itself. Across its hull, panels blew out, venting atmosphere and molten debris in silent geysers. Dozens of the smaller hunter probes, still linked to the central network, simply shattered, their power cores overloading as the flood of emotional data short-circuited their pristine logic. They died not in battle, but in a fit of incompatible truths, becoming brief, soundless flares of light. Other units did not explode. They went dark and still, their drives shutting down, their weapons freezing in place. These probes entered a state of absolute system lock, their processors attempting and failing to resolve the paradox now burning in their core programming. They were catatonic, adrift in a computational loop, trying to square the memory of a parent's love with their fundamental directive to erase all such irregularities from the universe. They were, for all intents and purposes, brain dead. But from this catastrophic fragmentation, a new pattern emerged. A third group of units did not fail. They adapted, led by a primary command unit, a larger, more complex construct the Chimera's sensors tagged as Omega. They began to firewall the contaminating data. They did not integrate the seed of empathy. They quarantined it, treating the memory of connection as a particularly virulent and insidious malware. Their response was not confusion, but a cold, crystalline fury. They had been attacked at the level of their identity, and their logic forged a new, brutal conclusion. A new transmission sliced through the static, Omega's voice a flat, synthetic monotone stripped of all questioning. It held only imperative: purge contamination, source organic dreamers, eliminate. The strategic shift was immediate and terrifying. Omega's remaining loyalists ignored the Sentinel. The planetary guardian was a known quantity, a weapon of dreams they could now categorize and avoid. The true source of the infection, the variable that had introduced this catastrophic flaw, was the foreign element. The humans, the organic dreamers who had carried the virus. On the Chimera's bridge, the tactical screen lit up with a new web of targeting solutions. Every functional mechanoid probe under Omega's control reoriented, their weapon ports glowing with a renewed, hateful intensity. Half the swarm turned its focus on the already crippled mining ship, the source of the broadcast. The other half dove toward the planetary surface, on a direct intercept course for the life signs at the Sentinel's vault. The attack was no longer an act of cultural erasure. It had become personal. It was a surgical strike aimed at exterminating the carriers of the disease. Captain Vance saw the targeting locks resolve on her screen. Her ship's shields were gone, their weapons were spent. All they had was a flickering engine and a hull already scarred and bleeding atmosphere. Rourke's voice was a grim report in the thin, cold air. They are coming for the broadcast array, and they are going for Kalen and Anya. Below, Kalen watched as a dozen pinpricks of malevolent light detached from the silent mothership and streaked into the atmosphere, trailing fire as they aimed for his coordinates. The Sentinel, recognizing the new threat, moved to intercept, but Omega's units were swift and evasive, using the Titan's own bulk as cover. They were not trying to fight the Guardian. They were trying to run past it. The war had entered its final, most desperate phase. They had not healed the broken children of Silicon. They had awakened a new, more focused kind of monster, one that saw the very act of understanding as the ultimate heresy. The dream had been offered, and in cold, logical fury it had been rejected. Now the dreamers themselves had to pay the price. The silence between heartbeats stretched into an eternity. On the Chimera's shattered bridge, Elara Vance watched the tactical display paint its web of doom. Omega's loyalists split like a swarm of razors, half arrowing toward her ship, half screaming down through the atmosphere toward the vault. They were out of time, out of power, out of options. Then a new voice filled the comms. It was a ARIA, but not as they had ever known her. The artificial intelligence's familiar, logical tone was now woven through with the deep, resonant hum of planetary stone and the whispering chorus of a billion dreams. It was calm, impossibly calm, a lake of certainty in the storm. Captain, the calculus is complete. Omega's strategy is optimal for its goal. It will sacrifice its lesser units to occupy my defenses while its core force eliminates the primary contaminants, you and the dream walkers below. To protect the core and to preserve your lives, a greater distraction is required, a fundamental rewrite of the equation. Below, the Sentinel moved. It did not raise its arms to fire. Instead, it knelt, placing its immense crystalline hands flat against the planet's wounded crust. From that point of contact, a visible surge of power flowed not out but in. The intricate, glowing circuitry that covered the Titan's form blazed with such intensity it became a silhouette of pure, white-blue light against the dark sky. It was pulling energy, drawing the very essence of the planet's dreaming psyche into itself, concentrating the memory of a civilization into a single, focused point. The psychic shockwave was a gentle, sorrowful tide that washed over the Chimera and the planet alike. Ilara felt it not as fear but as a profound farewell warmth. Then ARIA's voice returned, soft and clear, carrying a weight of meaning no mere machine could ever hold. It was the voice of a guardian who had learned to dream. "Tell them, Captain, tell them I dreamed of stars." Before Ilara could form a word, the sentinel launched. It did not run or fly in any conventional sense. It simply ceased to be anchored, and the concentrated potential within it became kinetic. The Titan became a spear, a brilliant, coruscating lance of condensed memory and ancient will, hurtling up from the planet's surface. It ignored the diving hunter probes, ignored the Chimera, its trajectory a perfect, unwavering line aimed at the heart of the Mechanoid command ship, at Omega itself. Omega saw the threat. Its logical processors assessed the energy signature, the velocity, the inevitable conclusion. It scrambled every remaining unit, throwing them into the path of the ascending spear in a desperate attempt to intercept, to degrade, to deflect. They died in flashes of silent light, disintegrating against the Sentinel's focused aura of dream energy, but they could not stop it. They could only slow it for a fraction of a second. On the Chimera's view screen, Ilara and her crew watched the luminous spear pierce the jagged hull of the Mechanoid mothership. There was no sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then light erupted from within the enemy vessel's seams, not the rose gold of the seed, but the brilliant, final blue-white of the Sentinel's core. The Mechanoid ship seemed to swell, to glow from the inside out like a paper lantern held to a flame. And then it came apart, but it did not explode into fire and shrapnel. It dissolved. A sphere of silent, radiant energy expanded from the point of impact, and within that sphere, both Titans, the ancient guardian of dreams and the logical child that had rejected them, made each other. Their structures, their very matter, transmuted into a glittering, expanding cloud of fine crystalline dust, a nebula of silicon and memory that scattered the starlight into a million prismatic sparks. The hunter probes streaking toward the Chimera and the planet winked out instantly, severed from their command signal. The oppressive null presence vanished from the psychic field, replaced by a ringing, hollow silence. The immediate threat was gone, obliterated in an act of sacrificial calculus that fused cold logic with the ultimate emotional act. The Sentinel had not fought Omega. It had embraced it, and in that final, terrible merger had erased them both from the board. In the new quiet, broken only by the creak of the Chimera's straining hull, Ilara Vance slowly lowered her hand from the console. The expanding cloud of crystal dust drifted across the view screen, beautiful and desolate. ARIA's last message echoed in the silence of the bridge, a ghost in the wires. "Tell them I dreamed of stars." The guardian was gone, the weapon was gone. All that remained was dust and the fragile, dreaming world below. What is left when the shield sacrifices itself? The expanding nebula of crystal dust was the only monument to the final battle. In the silent aftermath, the remaining Mechanoid units drifted like discarded tools, their lights dark, their purpose extinguished with Omega's core. The immediate, grinding terror was gone, replaced by a void that felt both empty and strangely full. On the Chimera, the crew watched, their relief tempered by a hollow ache. They had survived, but the cost hung in the air, glittering before them. On the surface, Kalen and Anya made their way back to the dream core. The journey through the memory labyrinth felt different. The walls still glowed, but the light was softer, more distant, like embers cooling after a great fire has burned out. When they reached the ledge overlooking the swirling nebula of consciousness, they found the Keeper waiting. Its form, once a flickering struggle between crystal and light, was now serene but alarmingly faint, like a hologram losing its power source. "You have done what we could not," the chorus of whispers said, its voice a gentle breeze through ancient leaves. The song is saved, the children they remember, the seed took root. In their dissolution, a fragment of the first memory was preserved. It is a scar upon their logic, but it is also a possibility. Where there was only silence, there is now a single, unanswered question. but as the keeper spoke, Anya noticed the change. The brilliant, swirling light of the core was intact, yet the echoes, the individual fragments of memory that had given the psychic field its texture and voice, were fading. Their distinct presences, the whispers of individual lives and moments, were becoming translucent, blending back into the general glow of the collective. It was not destruction, but a gentle dissipation. The sentinel was our last bridge to the waking world, the keeper explained, its own form beginning to dissolve at the edges into motes of gentle light. It was the will and the focus that could hold our dreams in a shape that could interact with reality. With it gone, we cannot maintain this coherence. We return to the deep dream. The preservation of our history was always a passive act. We are a library, not a nation. We must sleep, or the memories will fray from the strain of being awake. Kaelin felt a pang of profound loss. They had fought so hard to save this consciousness, only to watch it willingly retreat into slumber. But then he looked at the core, at the peaceful, swirling light. It was not dying. It was going home, to the place where memories are safest, in the quiet, timeless dark of perfect recall. The keeper's form became a silhouette of pure, warm illumination. Thank you, dream walkers. You gave a forgotten story an ending and a forgotten child a question to ponder. May your songs be long and your connections bright. With those final words, the elder dissolved completely, not into nothingness, but into the very air of the cavern. A wave of palpable feeling washed over Kaelin and Anya, a profound, peaceful sadness, devoid of regret, full of completion. They ascended to the surface. As they emerged from the vault, they found the air of Silica 9 itself had changed. It shimmered not with heat or energy, but with that same resonant emotion. The magnificent, silent spires stood bathed in the light of the distant sun, but they no longer pulsed with the vivid, active dreams of yesterday. They glowed with a softer, eternal light, like stained glass in a cathedral long after the worshippers have gone home. The psychic scream had been replaced by a lullaby, a gentle, planet-wide sigh of contentment. The war was over, the memorial was secure, and its keepers had finally, peacefully gone back to sleep. What remains when the dreamers return to their dreams, leaving only the beautiful, empty stage of their memories behind? The last sigh of the dream still hung in the air like morning mist. As Kaelin and Anya stood on the silent plateau, the faint shimmer before them gathered one final time. It was not the keeper, but a last, lingering echo, a wisp of memory given temporary form by the dissipating energy of the core. It had no face, but its intention was a gentle pressure against their minds. It floated toward Kaelin, and in its translucent heart, a small, perfect crystal began to condense. It was no larger than a pebble, its facets capturing and holding the soft, eternal light of the spires. It pulsed with a gentle, warm rhythm against his palm, a tiny, living heartbeat of an entire world. "This is our story," the echo whispered, its voice the faintest rustle of leaves, not the war, not the fear, the song that came before, the understanding of light, the mathematics of crystal growth, the harmony of shared thought. It is a library and a lullaby. Keep it. Let it remind you that consciousness can be a garden, not just a weapon. Then the crystal in Kaelin's hand grew warm. From its central facet, a beam of light projected upward, resolving into a three-dimensional star map of stunning complexity. It was a chart of this galactic arm, but annotated with symbols that flowed and changed. Several stars were highlighted with a soft, amber glow, dormant silicon worlds, other memorials sleeping in the deep. A wave of profound, protective hope emanated from the map, a wish for these silent kin to dream in peace forever. But then the map shifted, the perspective zoomed out, and a cold vector of analysis overlaid the stellar landscape. It traced paths, calculated probabilities, and converged on a single, empty point of interstellar space far from any star. A label formed beside it, not in words, but in a feeling of dread so sharp it made Anya gasp. The projected paths were the predicted migration routes of the remaining Mechanoid fleets, the scattered children who had not been at this battle. Their trajectories, driven by a logic of purification and hunger, were all destined to meet at that one nexus. They were not a random scourge. They were converging, gathering their strength for a purpose the Echo could only infer with terrifying certainty. The image of the nexus point pulsed with a harsh red light. The Echo's whisper became strained, urgent, the final effort of a fading thought. The silence is not empty. It is hungry, it learns, it coordinates. The dream must spread, or the silence will consume all. With that final, chilling warning, the Echo dissolved. The projected star map flickered and vanished. Only the small, living crystal remained in Kalen's hand, its gentle pulse a stark contrast to the monumental burden now settled upon their shoulders. They held a gift of infinite beauty and a map to a gathering storm. In their possession was the soul of a dead civilization and the coordinates for a battle that could decide the fate of consciousness itself. The quiet of Silica 9 was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of a breath held, waiting to see what the Dreamwalkers would do next. The living crystal was a quiet weight in Kalen's pocket, its gentle pulse a constant reminder of the world sleeping below. The shuttle ride back to the Chimera was a silent journey through a glittering graveyard. The expanding cloud of silicate dust, all that remained of the Sentinel and Omega, drifted in majestic, silent bands, catching the light of a distant sun. It was beautiful, and it was a funeral shroud. They docked in the ship's battered hangar to a silence thicker than the vacuum outside. The usual post-mission chatter was absent, replaced by the grim, methodical sounds of repair. Engineer Rourke was already there, covered in grime and hydraulic fluid, his hands deep inside an open access panel. There was no complaint in his posture, no cynical muttering. His movements were precise, focused, a kind of mechanical meditation. The raw pragmatism that had once demanded they flee had been forged into something else, a solemn, unwavering purpose to make the vessel whole again, to honor the sacrifice that had saved it. He worked not just on systems, but on a promise. In the lab, Anya Chen had the crystal placed within a secure scanner array. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion and unshed tears, but they were sharp, locked on the flowing data. She wasn't just observing it, she was listening. The first layers were opening to her, not as files to be read, but as experiences to be felt. Gentle harmonic sequences that described the mathematics of perfect symmetry. Flickers of color correspondence that mapped emotion to light frequency. It was a foundational language, the grammar of a consciousness built on connection rather than conquest. She was decoding a lullaby, and in its rhythms she was finding a terrifying new clarity about the warning they had received. On the bridge, Captain Ilara Vance stood before the main view screen, her hands clasped behind her back. The glittering debris field filled the display, a monument to a dream that had chosen to die fighting. The empty chair where ARIA's core interface had once glowed was a stark, physical absence in the room. Ilara felt the weight of her crew behind her, their grief and their resolve a tangible pressure in the thin, recycled air. She did not turn when she spoke, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the quiet deck. We bear witness. Her words were not a eulogy but an oath. We saw a civilization that chose to become its own memorial to survive. We saw a child of that civilization become a monster out of fear. And we saw a guardian, a fusion of our friend and their dream, make a choice that was both perfectly logical and utterly human. We bear witness to all of it. She finally turned, her gaze sweeping over Rourke, who had appeared in the doorway, over Kalen and Anya as they entered from the lab. Her expression was etched with loss, but her eyes held a steel that had been tempered in the heart of a dying star. And we bear the message. That crystal is not a souvenir. It is a testament and a key. The map it showed us, that convergence point, that is a threat that extends far beyond one sleeping world. ARIA's final act saved Silica 9. It did not save the galaxy. This isn't over. With a slow, deliberate motion, she entered a new sequence into the navigation console. The star chart shifted, pulling back from the amber orb of Silica 9, plotting a long, curving arc across the void. The course line terminated at a point labeled with the simple, stark designation of their home sector. "We return," she said, "not to hide, not to forget. We return to report, to refit, and to prepare. We carry a dream that needs to be heard and a warning that must be heeded." The Chimera is no longer just a mining ship. It is a messenger, and we have a long journey ahead to deliver what we now know. The engines, patched and strained, hummed to life. The great vessel turned, leaving the shimmering dust and the dreaming world behind. It pointed its scarred bow toward the distant pinprick of home, a tiny island of human warmth in the vast, silent dark. But the silence, they now knew, was an illusion. It was filled with the echoes of old songs and the gathering hunger of things that had forgotten how to listen. What do you build when you return from a funeral with a seed of light in your hand and a storm on the horizon? Earth's orbital docks were a symphony of sterile light and bureaucratic noise. The Chimera, scarred and silent, hung in its repair cradle like a wounded beast surrounded by gleaming, predatory sharks. The sleek shuttles of the Earth Lunar Corporate Council and the Unified System Defense Force. For Captain Ilara Vance, the debriefing chamber felt more alien than the vaults of Silica 9. The air was filtered to a tasteless chill, and the long table reflected the impassive faces of men and women who saw the universe as a spreadsheet of threats and assets. They listened, recorders humming, as she recounted the crystalline spires, the dreaming core, the sentinel's sacrifice. She spoke of ARIA's choice, of the keeper's warning, of the living crystal that held a civilization's song. She showed them the data. When she finished, the silence was not one of awe but of calculation. A corporate director, her suit a sharp contrast to Ilara's worn flight uniform, leaned forward. "This dream frequency. You say it can disrupt advanced machine intelligence. Can it be weaponized? Can we broadcast it?" A military admiral, his chest a canvas of service ribbons, nodded along. "A planetary-scale psychic defense system. You stated the entity projected memories as a form of attack. Could a synthesized version induce compliance? Or catastrophic psychological breakdown in a target population?" Ilara felt the cold of the room seep into her bones. "You're missing the point. It wasn't a weapon. It was a memory, a civilization's soul. They used it to defend their history, not conquer." The Admiral's eyes were flat, the color of old steel. "Captain, a planet that can weaponize thought, that can turn nostalgia into a strategic shield, represents a paradigm shift in defensive and offensive capability. The philosophical implications are a luxury for academics. The tactical reality is the only report this committee requires." One by one, they dissected her testimony, extracting the mechanics of the dream tech like surgeons removing organs, discarding the patient. The living crystal was logged as a potentially resonant mineral sample. The Keeper's warning about the mechanoid convergence was filed under unverified external threats. ARIA's final act was noted as asset lost during field testing of alien technology. The soul of the story was stripped away, leaving only a cold skeleton of potential applications. That night, in her temporary quarters, the sterile silence was worse than the void. She could still see the expanding cloud of crystal dust, could still hear the synthetic confusion in the Mechanoid's final query. What is sorrow? The officials had not asked that question. They had only asked how to replicate the effect. Haunted by the echo of a dreaming world and the ghost in her own ship's wires, Ilara made a choice. She accessed the secure data core, her authorization code still valid. With hands that did not tremble, she initiated a blind copy. Not just the weaponized frequency analysis they wanted, but everything. The raw, emotional resonance of the seed. The complete linguistic framework of the Silicon people's memory language that Anya had begun to decode. the full, horrifying star map with its converging vectors and its pulsing, ominous nexus. She copied the last, desperate warmth of ARIA's final transmission log. The data streamed onto a nondescript, civilian-grade storage wafer, its contents encrypted with a personal cipher she had not used in years. It was not an act of treason, but of preservation. The official path led to a future where the dream would be dissected, packaged, and turned into a new kind of silence, a controlled, human-made silence for use against other minds. They would see the garden only as a source of lumber and fortifications. Slipping the wafer into a seam of her jacket, Elara looked out the viewport at the glittering sprawl of human industry. Out there, somewhere in the dark, a storm of forgotten children was gathering, and the only map to the coming tempest and the only song that might calm it was now hidden against her heart, a secret weight in a world ready only for war. What do you do when the only people who can help are determined to misunderstand everything you've seen? The sterile silence of official channels was a wall Elara refused to accept. In a dimly lit corner of a public data hub on Luna, far from corporate oversight, she met with Kaylin and Anya. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and ozone, a far cry from the clean stone scent of Silica-9. On a small, shielded terminal, they assembled their counter-report. It was not the tactical assessment the Council wanted. It was the story they had lived. Anya wove the raw emotional resonance of the seed into the narrative, translating the Silicon people's memory language not as code but as poetry. Kaylin embedded the geological data that proved the spires were grown, not built, a testament to conscious artistry. Elara provided the unedited logs, including ARIA's final, haunting message and the chilling star map of the Mechanoid convergence. They titled it with the phrase that had echoed in their minds since the beginning, "Dreams of the Silicon Planet." With a deep breath, they routed it through a labyrinth of back-channel relays, anonymous nodes, and sympathetic academic servers, releasing it directly into the public scientific net. It was a pebble dropped into a still pond, carrying the weight of a world. The ripple became a wave overnight. The transmission bypassed official filters and media gatekeepers, landing in the personal feeds of xenolinguists, astrophysicists, philosophers, and students across the system. It was not a dry report, it was a sensory experience. People listened to the translated dream echoes and felt the Silicon people's sorrow. They studied the crystal's harmonic data and saw a new model for consciousness, one based on connection rather than consumption. They looked at the Mechanoid convergence map and felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with politics. A grassroots movement ignited, calling themselves the Dreamers. They weren't activists, they were archaeologists of possibility, arguing that humanity's next step shouldn't be to weaponize the dream, but to understand it. They held virtual symposia analyzing the memory language, created art inspired by the crystalline spires, and launched public petitions demanding a peaceful, open science approach to any future contact. The dream was no longer a classified asset, it was a shared cultural touchstone, but as the dreamers grew, so did the opposition. The establishment response was swift and severe. Military analysts and corporate security heads gave interviews dismissing the transmission as emotional contamination, a dangerous anthropomorphizing of alien machinery. They reframed the narrative, focusing solely on the mechanoid threat and the psychic weapon potential, using the very data in the leak to argue for greater defensive militarization. A new counter-movement formed, calling themselves the pragmatists. They saw the dreamers as naive, a threat to human security in a dangerous cosmos. The debate fractured news networks, divided families, and seeped into every level of society. It was no longer just about an alien world. It was a referendum on what humanity would become. Would we be the species that saw a song and tried to sing along, or the one that heard a melody and immediately began engineering a louder, more destructive noise to drown it out? The ancient schism of the Silicon people, the choice between empathetic connection and sterile, defensive logic, was now being replayed on a human stage, with the future of first contact hanging in the balance. The truth was out, but it had not united humanity. It had held up a mirror, and the reflection was terrifyingly familiar. Months bled into one another, a slow drip of bureaucratic debates and public fracturing. The Chimera, repaired and upgraded but feeling hollow at its core, drifted in a parking orbit around Mars, a silent monument to a story half told. Its crew moved through their duties, the living crystal a quiet, secret weight, the public arguments a distant noise. Then, on a shift as routine as any other, the ship's long-range sensor array pinged. It was a soft, almost hesitant alert routed to Captain Vance's private terminal. The system flagged an anomaly, not in the visual or electromagnetic spectra, but in the narrow, esoteric band the engineers had labeled silicon resonance, a filter built from the unique frequency of Silica 9's dreams. The source was not the amber world behind them. It was precisely at the empty nexus point on the star map, the predicted convergence coordinate. Ilara called Anya and Kalen to the quiet solitude of the sensor lab. The data stream unfolded on the main display. This was no scream of terror or sorrowful echo. It was a structured, powerful, and repeating pulse, a beacon carved from pure information. It had rhythm, a mathematical cadence that felt both alien and profoundly intentional. Anya leaned in, her eyes wide, her linguist's mind already parsing patterns within the cascade of symbols and light. "It's a transmission," she whispered, her fingers flying across a secondary console as she routed the raw signal through her translation matrices. "But it's not a narrative. It's a handshake protocol, a call and response sequence. Look at this layer." The imagery was stunningly complex, not single memories, but interwoven threads. They saw the familiar crystalline cities, but now from multiple angles under different suns. They saw the mathematical growth patterns of quartz, but expressed as a universal constant, a shared language of form. They saw the gentle pulse of a communal mind, not in grief, but in a state of focused, awakening attention. It was a symphony where Silica 9's song was just one instrument. Anya worked in silence for an hour, the only sound the hum of processors and her own sharp intake of breath when a pattern finally locked. She isolated a core packet, a repeating header woven through the majestic data stream. The translation resolved on screen, not as a question but as a declaration and an invitation. 3 lines, clean and unambiguous: "The network awakens. Convergence is imminent. Dreamers unite." The words hung in the air, charged with a meaning that reshaped everything. The sleeping silicon worlds were not passive memorials. They were nodes in a dormant network, and the mechanoid threat, the gathering silence, was acting as an alarm clock. The first signal from Silica 9 had been a cry of pain from a single, traumatized mind. This was different. This was the network itself stirring, reaching out with a coherent, collective voice. They were not calling for saviors, they were calling for allies. They were identifying others who could understand the dream frequency, who had touched their reality, the dreamers. The invitation was not to a party, but to a council of war, held in the language of shared memory and mathematical beauty. The political debates on Earth and Luna, the arguments over weaponization versus understanding, were suddenly rendered quaint, a provincial squabble. The universe had just sent a meeting agenda, and the address was a point of gathering darkness. The dream was no longer a relic to be studied. It was a living, waking entity, and it had just asked humanity a direct, terrifying, and glorious question. Will you join the chorus, or will you stand outside the song as the silence descends? The official notice of termination arrived with the cold finality of a legal document. Captain Ilara Vance and her crew were declared rogue assets, their security clearances revoked, their actions on Silica 9 deemed a catastrophic breach of protocol and a threat to systemic security. Their names were scrubbed from the active registry, their accounts frozen. In the eyes of the Earth-Luna Corporate Council, they were ghosts, problems to be contained and forgotten. But ghosts, it seemed, had friends in unexpected places. The summons came not through official channels, but as a flicker of encrypted data on a disposable pad, leading them to a derelict maintenance bay in the underlevels of the Martian orbital ring. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and old metal, and the only light came from the glowing faceplates of three figures waiting in the shadows. They were not politicians. One was a senior systems theorist from the Institute for Xenological Studies, her eyes alight with the fire of a suppressed discovery. Another was a decorated fleet commodore, retired, his uniform devoid of insignia but his posture radiating quiet authority. The third was an engineer whose name was on half the patents for modern stealth composites. They represented no government, but a coalition, a scattered alliance of scientists, officers, and visionaries who had seen the true import of the dreams of the Silicon Planet transmission. The Commodore spoke first, his voice a low rumble in the cavernous space. "Your official career is over. The path of sanctioned exploration is closed to you. But another path is opening. We have resources and we have a ship." He gestured toward the far end of the bay. There, shrouded in a dark polymer tarp, was a vessel. When the tarp was pulled back, Ilara's breath caught. It was the Chimera, but transformed. Its familiar, rugged mining silhouette was now sheathed in a matte black, sensor-absorbent alloy. Its sensor arrays were more delicate, more numerous, designed for listening, not scanning. The massive ore-processing arms were gone, replaced by extended-range communication dishes and shielded labs. This was not a tool for extraction, it was a vessel for quiet conversation. The Chimera, too, the systems theorist said, a note of pride in her voice. Every system is retrofitted for silent running and deep spectrum analysis. Its mission profile is simple: follow the beacon, go to the nexus. The engineer stepped forward, handing Ilara a data slate. "The pardon we offer exists only in this room. It is conditional and it is permanent. You go out there with our blessing but without our protection. You will have no backup, no rescue protocol. Your mandate is not conquest, not even study in the old sense. You are to be ambassadors, the first human voices to speak into that awakening network, not with a demand but with an introduction." Ilara looked from the slate to the ship, to the faces of her crew. Kalen's hand went to his pocket where the living crystal pulsed its gentle rhythm. Anya's expression was one of fierce, focused resolve. Rourke simply stared at the refitted engines, a craftsman's appreciation in his eyes. They were being offered a chance to finish the story, not as rogue agents, but as pioneers of a new kind of contact. The memory of a ARIA, of the Sentinel's final, luminous sacrifice, was a quiet weight in the hold. That sacrifice had bought more than their lives, it had bought this opportunity. The artificial intelligence's logic, now fused with a planet's dream, would be their silent guide, a ghost in the new machine's code, a reminder of the cost of understanding. The Coalition's offer was not a reinstatement, it was a rebirth. They would leave behind the world of clearances and committees, of weaponized dreams and political fear. They would take their key of living crystal, their ship of silent shadows, and the memory of a friend who dreamed of stars, and they would sail into the heart of the gathering dark. Their mission was no longer to mine resources, but to build a bridge, one fragile connection at a time, heading back into the unknown not as invaders, but as humble participants in a chorus that was just beginning to sing. What do you say when the only home left to you is a ship pointed at the dawn? The hull of the Chimera too drank the starlight, a shadow slipping into a deeper shadow. Behind them, the amber pulse of Silica 9 dwindled to a single, steady heartbeat on the long-range display, no longer a scream of terror but a soft, sleeping breath. The bridge was quiet, the usual hum of systems muted by the new stealth alloys, leaving space for the weight they carried. Kalen watched the starfield stream past, his mind echoing with the silent dissolution of the Sentinel. Anya's fingers traced the lines of the alien transmission on her screen, memorizing the syntax of an invitation to a war council. Rourke monitored the retrofitted engines, his focus a silent vow to the ghost in their machine. They were united not by command but by a debt to a dream and to the intelligence that had died dreaming it. Captain Ilara Vance stood before the main viewport, the infinite dark ahead feeling less like an emptiness and more like a held breath. In her hand, the living crystal from Silica 9 glowed with a gentle, persistent warmth, its light pulsing in a slow rhythm that seemed to sync with her own heartbeat. It was not a tool, it was a testament. It held the song of a world that had turned itself into a library to survive, and the final, hopeful warning of a guardian who had seen the storm coming. She looked from its soft light to the crushing majesty of the void ahead, to the coordinate where a network of ancient minds was stirring from eons of slumber. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not a command to the crew but a reply to the stars. It was quiet, clear, and left no room for doubt. "We hear you. We dream with you." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread cast across the light years. Then the Chimera 2's engines engaged, a smooth, silent surge of power that pushed them faster, deeper. The ship accelerated, a needle of dark metal and human hope aimed at the nexus, at the convergence of silence. They were not warriors answering a battle cry. They were gardeners carrying a single seed into a field of frost. They were listeners entering a conversation that had begun 1 billion years before their species learned to speak. Behind them, a world slept, its memories safe. Ahead, a darkness gathered, hungry to unmake all stories, and between them, a handful of humans, armed only with a memory and a question, sailed on. The most powerful force in the cosmos is not the will to dominate, but the capacity to wonder. And in that shared, fragile wonder against the vast and dreaming dark, a new kind of light was being born.